That right there, that is the end goal. It's that aggressive, punchy, and crystal clear sound that makes a metal track just hit you in the chest. I spent years refining my process to get here, and so much of it comes down to the final stage, the Mixbus. Today, I'm going to go through the exact 6-step hardware and software chain I trust for every single professional metal mix. This specific combo is my secret weapon for getting the perfect blend of punch, clarity, and aggression that makes a track truly heavy. And what it does is take a good solid mix that sounds like this, and turns it into a finished, commercial-ready record that sounds like this. Today, I'm not holding anything back. I'm going to walk you through every piece of gear, every plugin, and every setting so you can understand how to get this sound for yourself. A huge thank you to Anas for letting me use his song Deciphering Truth for this video. There'll be a link to his music in the description. Also, for anyone new to the channel, my name's Daniel Tabbitt. I'm the owner of Liquid Studios, and I'm a mixing engineer who works with 3-time Grammy-winning mastering engineer Alan Douches. Before we get into the specific gear, we have to talk about the why. My whole philosophy is built around top-down mixing. This just means I set up my Mixbus chain super early in the process, and then I build the entire mix into it. So instead of wrestling with hundreds of individual tracks at the end, trying to force them all to play nice, I'm shaping the overall vibe from the very beginning. It helps me make better decisions on every single track because I already know the world they need to fit into. The goal for this chain is pretty straightforward. I'm looking for 3 things: cohesive glue that makes the band sound like they're actually in the same room, an aggressive punch that makes the drums and guitars feel explosive, and modern clarity so you can hear every instrument, even when things get crazy dense. This chain is a sequence where each step perfectly prepares the audio for the next, starting with big, smart adjustments and moving towards fine-tuning, character, and finally, loudness. All right, let's break this down, step by step. So first up in the chain is a software plugin called Soundtheory Gullfoss, and I always use the Master Edition. Think of it as a super intelligent dynamic EQ. It's listening to your mix constantly, making hundreds of tiny tweaks every second to fight muddiness and harshness while bringing out details you didn't even know were there. I put it first because I want to feed my analog gear the cleanest, most balanced signal possible. It's like cleaning a canvas before you start painting. Gullfoss doesn't really have a heavy sound. Its work is subtle, but it's so critical. The 2 main controls are recover and tame. Recover brings out the good stuff that's getting buried, and tame calms down frequencies that are jumping out too much. My starting point is usually around 20 or 30% for both recover and tame. Then I'll play around with the bias control until it looks like it's doing about an equal amount of work on both sides. For metal, which can get really harsh in the high mids, Gullfoss is an absolute lifesaver. It just transparently smooths out those ice pick frequencies from guitars and cymbals without ever making them sound dull. So let me show you with the plugin engaged and then with it bypassed. When you bypass it, the mix suddenly feels a little cloudy, maybe less focused. Kick it back on, and everything just snaps into a clearer, more defined picture. It's the foundation for everything that comes after. Okay, so the mix is dynamically balanced. My next move is to deal with the stereo image, specifically in the low end. For this, I grab the multiband imager from iZotope Ozone. My one and only mission here is to force the sub-bass frequencies into complete mono. In metal, a tight, focused low end is non-negotiable. If your kick drum and bass have stereo information way down low, you could get phase problems and the whole mix can feel weak and washed out, especially on a big speaker system. I just create one band in the imager from about 80 Hz all the way down. Then I crank the width control for that band all the way down to a -100. Done. Everything below 80 Hz is now dead center. You don't really hear this as this big dramatic effect, but you absolutely feel it. The punch from the kick and the fundamental of the bass just become more solid and centered. It's a simple, boring, technical move that makes sure the foundation of your track is solid as a rock. So we're going to jump into the DAW and check it out. Now, when I toggle it on and off, you won't hear much on laptop speakers, but if you have headphones or monitors that can handle low end, you'll hear the kick drum and bass go from being a little bit blurry to a solid punch right in the middle of your forehead. It's all about focus. Our mix is clean. The low end is tight. Now it's time for the fun part. Let's add some character. This is where we go out of the box and into the hardware. My next stop is a stereo pair of warm audio EQP tube equalizers. These are clones of the legendary Pultec EQP-1A. And they're famous for adding a rich musical tone that plugins have a really hard time copying. My main focus here is shaping the mid-range and top end to bring out aggression. First, I use the EQP to slightly boost at 800 Hz, which really brings out more of that mid-range body and presence. Then, for the aggression and detail, I do a wide bandwidth boost, usually a bit bigger than the first one, right at 5K. This is my secret for bringing out the aggression and detail in the guitars and helping the vocals to cut through everything else. It really makes the attack of the instruments pop. Plus, the tubes and transformers in these units add their own subtle saturation, making the whole mix feel richer and more three-dimensional. You kick these in, and you get that analog warmth and life. Turn them off, and suddenly everything feels a little flatter and a little too digital. So let's go check it out. The main EQ shaping done, I move on to what I call the color box, the SSL Fusion. This is a ridiculous piece of analog hardware that gives you 6 different ways to add vibe and cohesion to a mix. For my metal chain, I focus on a few of these sections to get that pro sound. First is the vintage drive. This is a saturation circuit I use to give the mix a little bit of an analog hair and excitement. I'm not talking about heavy distortion, just a touch of grit. I'll turn up the drive knob until the little light is just flickering green, maybe hitting the orange on the loudest parts. It just adds this subtle harmonic density that helps glue everything together. Then I use the violet EQ to do a healthy boost at 50 Hz and a slightly less boost at 12K. This is that classic smile curve that makes a mix sound more expensive. To complement that, I also engage the transformer button to get more analog color and low-end richness. After adding all that character, I use the high-frequency compressor to smooth things out. This thing is brilliant for taming harsh high frequencies without making the mix sound dark. Cymbals and distorted guitars can have this fizzy, painful energy. I'll set the crossover somewhere around 8K or 10K and just dial in the threshold enough to just gently tame any of those pokey transients. It's like a very smooth, invisible hand on the top end, almost like using tape saturation. Finally, I give the stereo image control a tiny little nudge. I'm super careful here because it's easy to go too far and sound weird, but just a touch on the width knob can make the whole mix feel a little bigger and more immersive. So let's go check that out. When the SSL Fusion is engaged, the mix just feels more like a record. It's more cohesive, the harshness is gone, and it has that expensive console-like sound. Okay, this might be the most critical step in the entire chain for getting that classic punchy sound. We're talking about the glue, and for that, I use the Warm Audio bus compressor, which is their take on the famous SSL G-Series bus compressor. Its only job is to make everything move and breathe together as one single unit. For metal, my settings here are pretty much locked in. I go with a faster attack setting, the 0.3 millisecond setting to be exact. This helps shape the transients in a way that contributes to the overall punch. For the release, I usually use the fastest setting, or sometimes auto, depending on the song's tempo. A fast release gives you that musical pump that adds a ton of energy. I keep my ratio at 4:1. Now here's the key to my workflow. I actually leave the threshold at the same setting for every mix. My method is to prep the mix by gain staging it so the loudest snare hits are doing 4 dB of gain reduction tops. This approach makes sure I have consistency with my levels for every mix I do. I also use the high pass filter in the sidechain at 60 Hz to stop the kick drum from making the compressor overreact. Let's go check out how this sounds. The second you kick this thing in, the change is undeniable. The mix gets tighter, the snare hits harder, and everything just feels finished. And finally, the last step. This is all about getting the mix loud enough to compete out in the real world without totally wrecking it. For this, I use a dead simple plugin I love, the Black Salt Audio Clipper. Now, a clipper isn't a limiter. Instead of squashing your dynamics, it just cleanly shaves off the tippy tops of the loudest peaks. This lets you turn the whole track up without your limiter working so hard and sounding choked. The Black Salt Audio Clipper is just two main controls, input and a threshold slider. That's it. That's why I love it. My goal is to just transparently knock down the few peaks that are still jumping out after the bus compressor. I'll bring down the threshold and push the input a little, just watching the meter to make sure that I'm only clipping a few decibels. I'm not trying to get audible distortion. This is how you raise the perceived loudness, what you actually feel, while keeping the punch we worked so hard to create. This is that final touch that gets the mix loud and proud. When you toggle it on, the whole track gets noticeably louder, but the punch is still there. Now there's a big exception here. About half the mixes I do are sent off to be mastered by the legendary Alan Douches. In those cases, I bypass this plugin completely to leave enough headroom for him to do his mastering. So if I'm mastering it myself, the clipper's on. If it's going to him, it's off. So that's the whole chain. We started with a pretty good mix, but it was really just a collection of different sounds. Now, after running it through this 6-step process, it sounds like a cohesive, powerful, and professional record. Let's listen one more time to where we started. And now with the full Mixbus chain doing its thing. The difference really speaks for itself. That's the power of a well-designed Mixbus chain. So let's do a quick recap of the whole chain. Soundtheory Gullfoss for smart EQ and clarity, iZotope Ozone Imager to lock the sub-bass in mono, 2 warm audio EQPs for that big musical analog EQ shaping, SSL Fusion for the analog vibe, saturation, and smoothing, the warm audio bus compressor to be the punchy glue, and the Black Salt Audio Clipper for clean and transparent loudness. But look, don't just go and copy these settings blindly. The real key here is to understand why each piece is in the chain and what job it's doing. Use this as a blueprint to start experimenting. The specific gear matters way less than the function it's performing. All right, now it's your turn. What's the one plugin or piece of hardware that you absolutely cannot live without on your Mixbus? Drop it in the comments below. I read all of them, and I'm genuinely curious to see what you're all using. And finally, if you're in a band and want your record to have this exact professional, powerful sound, but would rather focus on making music, I do offer my mixing services. I only work with metal bands, and I love helping bands achieve a sound that's both aggressive and clear. If you're interested in working together, you can find all the details in the description below. Thanks for watching.